You're here. I'm glad you're watching. Shows that you have an interest in Yahweh, and hopefully I can add to that interest with the study that I'm going to do or continue doing. There will be a little change this coming month. I will be doing the sermon on trumpets. And it'll be a sermon, not the study. So prepare yourselves. Well, what's the trumpet? It's a warning. It's a call to arms. So you're going to get your arms called. But for those that have been watching my progress over the last year, I guess you could say, I have completed my chemotherapy. And so now I just got to go and take the test to see how well the stents did in my heart, because there's 6 of them. I actually have to carry a card with me so that if I go through a metal detector, I can show them that I'm not the bomb. Sorry, that I do have a heart and it has not been replaced totally by metal. And that on the 22nd, I go in to take a scan to see how well the chemotherapy, the chemo treatments did on my lymph nodes, and whether or not they've been resized and thus are no longer a problem. I never noticed them as being a problem. It only showed up when they had to do the test for me to have bypass surgery. And then they determined they couldn't do it because the chemo would not allow the sutures to heal properly on the heart. So then they had to do the stents. But anyway, going on with this, as we've been leading up to, here's one of the things that I really noticed about this study with Ezekiel, is that Yahweh wasn't just focusing on Israel when he sent them into captivity. Yahweh actually prepared the person that did it to him with Nebuchadnezzar. He inspired Nebuchadnezzar to do what Nebuchadnezzar did. He used Nebuchadnezzar as his tool, his weapon against the children of Israel for what they'd done. But it wasn't limited just to the children of Israel. See, there's one thing about it. We have a big world out here. This world was created by Yahweh. All the ones that are in it, from the beginning with Adam and Eve, they knew the truth. Those that were of Noah, they knew the truth of who Yahweh was and what he had intended. His sons lost that truth over time. The world has lost what Yahweh intended and tend to want to go after everything else in the world. So when it comes down to this, as we've been doing this with Ezekiel the last few chapters, he has now sent Israel totally. First the northern 10 tribes went into captivity, then Judah and Benjamin and the Levites went into captivity, the second grouping. And this is basically during the time of Ezekiel and Isaiah and Jeremiah. They were in different parts of where this was going on. And so we've gotten up to this point where they have gone into captivity. Now Yahweh has turned his attention on all those others that were involved in, one, subverting what Israel was supposed to be doing. That taught them idolatry. That taught them adultery. That taught them fornication. Because, see, the easiest thing to do was to, through sexual sins, was to corrupt. And once you corrupt, well, I kind of get off on this. So, in one aspect of this, the corruption, you look at the world today. What is the main part of corruption? What is it? What it revolves around? How do the most of them, whether you're talking about the current president, his son, and I'm not just limited to them. I'm talking about practically every corrupt politician out there. All of that, how were they corrupted? It's specific. They take time and they go after the top. And once you corrupt the top, it's not hard to corrupt everything below them, because then you've got them leading everybody else away. And that's what happened here. Once they had corrupted the king, and they corrupted the princes, and corrupted the Levites, all the religious saints, to where they would turn their attention to the idols, and created new idols. And in some cases, Israel came up with worship services that even the Gentiles found disgusting. And so, you go through this. And so we're now down to this point here, that Yahweh has turned his attention. He's turned his attention against the nations surrounding. And what's so special about those nations? They're cousins. When you really think about it, when you go back, Noah's sons and their descendants, so that's the world's population. So they were related to everybody that was out there in some form or fashion. So it wasn't like these people had never had a chance. They'd had a chance. And they had, through their own corrupting their own selves, had become really totally corrupted. And they said, well, if I'm going to be corrupted, then I need to have you corrupted in order so that we're on the same level. So you can't say nothing about me because you're just as bad as I am. I've seen religious organizations do the same thing. They purposely would corrupt the new members, simply because if you're corrupted, there's nothing you can complain about because you're just as bad as they are. Yeah. And you're just as guilty as they are.
Dennis, yeah. There are some organizations won't even let you become a part of them unless they have something over on you, so that they can manipulate you.
And so, yeah. So, I mean, we're down to this point. This part of Ezekiel, we're in chapter 31, so you can be there, ready to go. Also, I'm doing this a little bit differently. Normally, I print it out, but I wasn't too sure how far I was going to be able to get into all of this, and so I put it on the computer, and I can go as far as I can, or not. Ezekiel 31. You'll have to forgive me because some of this I'm going to have to work on it. Okay, what I'm going to do is, the way this is titled in my eSword program, or the heading that it gives is Pharaoh to be slain. If you're out there on the internet, or you're watching this on DVD or CD, listening to it later, I highly recommend that you go out on the internet and download this eSword, and it's little e, with a dash, SOWORD, I think org, and download their Bible program. Well, once you download the Bible program, you have Bibles that are free. Then you got Bibles that cost money because they're within their copyright time. You got commentaries, which David was pointing out from. Well, let's see. My commentaries, I have Barnes, Clark, Gill, Keel, and DeLeach. That's basically the Old Testament. Meyer, Matthew Henry, and James Fawcett and Brown. They're pretty much, and it gives you a cross section. There's Bibles, there's commentaries, then there's dictionaries. They've got a better dictionary than Strong's. Strong's has one problem. It doesn't separate now I can't think of the right word, Robert. Tense, TMB is what the short's for. But what tense it is, because that makes a difference as to how you actually translate the word. Because there are people that, believe that something is, it also tells you whether it's past tense, future tense, whatever.
Future progressive tense,
yeah. And but that makes a difference, because that's why this big argument over whether or not it was a renewed covenant. Sorry, the word there when it's translated is not the renewed is not does not mean renewed. It means new only. And so it's so anyway. They have that. One of the things that I really liked was the Brown Drivers Briggs. That's a major one. Then also it has a King James concordance, so that you can look up the Hebrew word or the Greek word in that particular segment, and it will give you where that word is translated and how it's translated in every scripture in the Bible that it appears in.
Works good on iPhone also.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, there's a version that goes with the iPhone, or I should say there's even one that goes with analog, I think, phones. So, but it's for something to have handy that you just take and do a quick search. It also has the ability to search every word. You can search the words in the Bible programs, in the dictionaries, and in the commentaries.
What's cool is you can search a phrase also.
You can search a phrase, which really makes it helpful because
You tie 3 or 4 words together, it'll find every place.
as long as you don't do like me and forget which order the words go.
Oh, transpose.
I know what I'm looking for, and I'll spend hours sometimes chasing down the rabbit holes. But anyway, let's go on here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read you chapter 31 first, and then we'll go back and go through it verse by verse. In the 11th year, in the 3rd month, in the 1st day of the month, gives you very determined time of when it's happening, Yahweh's word came to me saying, Son of man, tell Pharaoh king of Egypt and his multitude, whom are you like in your greatness? How you compare yourself? Behold, verse 3, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon with beautiful branches, and with a forest-like shade of high stature, and its top was among the thick boughs. Verse 4, the waters nourished it, the deep made it grow, its rivers ran all around its plantation, and it sent out its channels to all the trees of the field. Therefore, its stature was exalted above all the trees of the field, and its boughs were multiplied. Its branches became long by reason of many waters, when it spread out. All the birds of the sky made their nest in its boughs. Under its branches, all the animals of the field gave birth to their young. All great nations lived under its shadow. Thus was it beautiful in its greatness, in the length of its branches, for its root was by many waters. The cedars of the garden, in the garden of Elohim, could not hide it. The cypress trees were not like its boughs. The pine trees were not as its branches, nor was any tree in the garden of Elohim like it in its beauty. I made it beautiful by the multitude of its branches, so that all the trees of Eden that were in the garden of Elohim envied it. And therefore, thus says Adonai Yahweh, because you are exalted in stature, and he has set his top among the thick boughs, and his heart is lifted up in his height, I will even deliver him into the hand of the mighty ones of the nations. He will surely deal with him. I have driven him out for his wickedness. That's the reason this is going on. Verse 12, strangers, the tyrants of the nations have cut him off and have left him. His branches have fallen on the mountain and in all the valleys, and his boughs are broken by all the watercourses of the land. All the peoples of the earth have gone down from his shadow and have left him. All the birds of the sky will dwell on his ruin, and all the animals of the field will be on his branches. Verse 14, to the end that none of all the trees by the waters exalt themselves in their stature, and don't set their top among the thick boughs. Their mighty ones don't stand up on their height, even all who drink water. For they are all delivered to death, to the lower parts of the earth, among the children of men, with those whom go down to the pit. Thus says Adonai Yahweh. In the day when he went down into Sheol, I caused a mourning. I covered the deep for him and restrained its rivers. The great waters were stopped. I caused Lebanon to mourn for him, and all the trees of the field fainted for him. I made the nations to shake at the sound of his fall when I cast him down to Sheol with those who descend into the pit. All the trees of Eden, the choice and best of Lebanon, all that drink water, were comforted in the lower parts of the earth. They also went down into Sheol, Sheol being the grave, with him to those who are slain by the sword. Yes, those who were his arm, who lived under his shadow in the middle of the nations. To whom are you thus like in glory and in greatness among the trees of Eden? Yet you will be brought down with the trees of Eden to the lower parts of the earth. You will lie in the middle of the uncircumcised with those who are slain by the sword. This is Pharaoh and all his multitude, says Adonai Yahweh. You know, well, what does all that mean? What is all the great, flowing words and everything like this? Well, then that's where these commentaries come in handy. Going back to verse 1. In the 11th year, in the 3rd month, in the 1st day of the month, Yahweh's word came to me, saying, this is a month before Jerusalem was actually taken. It is in Jeremiah 39:2, it says, in the 11th year of Zedekiah, in the 4th month, in the 9th month, hath the city been broken up. In other words, Jerusalem was overtaken 1 month after this particular prophecy was given. Verse 2, Son of man, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and his multitude, whom are you like in your greatness? To Pharaoh Hophra, the then reigning king, this is the commentary, not to him personally by word of mouth, for the prophet was now in Chaldea, but by delivering out a prophecy concerning him, which he might have an opportunity of sending to him. So, it backs up the fact that Ezekiel is in captivity when he's writing this. He says, whom are you like in your greatness? Look over all the records of time is what he's being instructed. And into all the empires, kingdoms, and estates that have been. Draw a comparison between yourself and the greatest potentate that ever was. In other words, fancy yourself to be equal to him. This will not secure you from ruin and destruction. It won't protect you. For as they have been humbled, they're gone, they're humbled, they're fallen, they've gone, so will you be. Pitch, for instance, on the Assyrian monarch, meaning he pointed out the Assyrian king, whose empire has been the most ancient, extensive, and flourishing, and yet now crushed. And as you are like him in greatness, at least you think so, so you are in pride and will be in your end, to assure of which is the drift of the following account of the king of Assyria. So he goes on verse 3. Now he talks about, behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon with beautiful branches and with a forest-like shade of high stature, and its top was among the thick boughs. Commentary, with fair branches, meaning not children, not nobles, nor subjects, but provinces, many and large, which were subject to this monarch. In other words, he had a vast territory that he had control over. And with a shadowing shroud, he had power, dominion, authority, a mighty army sufficient to protect all that were under his government and subject to it, and of a high stature, exalted above all the kings and kingdoms of the earth. You look at Egypt today, you don't see that. But back then, he was the power. And his top was among the thick boughs. His kingly power, headship, and dominion was over a multitude of petty princes and states, comparable to the thick boughs and branches of a tree, or among the clouds, as the Septuagint and Arabic versions render it, above the heights of which the Assyrian monarch attempted to ascend. It's the 5th prophecy against Egypt, a warning to Pharaoh from the fate of the Assyrians. The Assyrian Empire, after having been supreme in Asia for 4 centuries, had been overthrown by the united forces of the Babylonians and the Medes in the year of the battle of Carchemish, That's in 605 BC, which had broken the power of Egypt. This gives force to the warning to Egypt from Assyria's fall. Verse 4, the waters nourish it. The deep made it grow. Its rivers ran all around its plantation, and it sent out its channels to all the trees of the field. Commentary, the waters made him great. The waters of the Tigris, near to which stood the city of Nineveh, the metropolis of the Assyrian monarchy, the traffic brought by the which river made it rich and great, and the whole empire and the king of it. In other words, it was on a waterway where merchandise was going back and forth all the time. The deep set him up on high, and her rivers running round about his plants. The vast trade by sea, the profits and commodities of which were conveyed through various rivers, which ran around about the provinces of the empire, which were as plants in a field, and by which they were enriched, and the whole empire and the king of it were raised to a prodigious pitch of wealth and power. And it says, and sent out little rivers to all the trees of the field, so that the common people, comparable to the trees of the field for their number and usefulness, all receive profit and advantage hereby, or else by waters and the deep may be meant the multitude of people even. Compare this with, or as in Revelation 17:15, just one verse, and he says to me, the waters that you did see, where the whore does sit, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. That's a part of a prophecy about the great whore, Babylon, which sat on in this area, which increased his kingdom, filled his provinces, supplied his colonies, and enlarged his power and riches. As the Jewish commentary, the Targum, states, by the people he was multiplied, by his auxiliaries he became strong. He subjected kings under his government, and his governors he appointed over all the provinces of the earth. Ezekiel 31:5, therefore its stature was exalted above all the trees of the field, and its boughs were multiplied. Its branches became long by reason of many waters when it spread them out. I mean, he's laying out all of this thing of how great you are. It says, commentary, therefore his height was exalted above all the trees of the field. His majesty, grandeur, and glory were advanced above all princes, nobles, and people. All ranks and degrees of men, let them be compared to trees taller or lower. His boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long. The provinces of his empire became more numerous. He expanded, and were spread far and near, and reached to distant countries. Because of the multitude of waters, when he shot forth, either the vast number of people which were daily increased, or were sent out to people distant colonies, newly subdued or planted, or because of the great traffic which was carried on in different parts and the advantages arising from it. See, one of the things, when they moved the Israelites out of Israel, they moved other peoples into to replace them, because you already had all these farms and you already had all this land to work with. The Jewish commentary, the Targum, says, therefore he was lifted up in his strength above all the kings of the earth, and his army was multiplied, and his auxiliaries prevailed over many people through his victories. You know, everything just became bigger and better, big and better. Ezekiel 31:6, all the birds of the sky made their nest in its boughs. You know, beautiful tree, under its branches. All the animals of the field gave birth to their young. All great nations lived under its shadow. Commentary, all the fowls of the heavens made their nest in his boughs. People from all parts of the world under the whole heavens flocked to his dominions and settled themselves in one province or another, promising themselves protection, prosperity, and peace under his government. Think about it, even with Israel. Even though they had gone into captivity, when that 70-year captivity ended, they didn't come back. They'd already set themselves up, because when they moved them out of Israel, they set them up, they self-governed themselves. They took care of themselves in the provinces they were put into. And so, you know, they felt comfortable. Why should we go back to what we had before? When we're doing fine here, is the way they look at it. Go on in the commentary, and under his branches did all the beasts of the field bring forth their young. Even people of a more savage disposition, meaning people that were even more uncivilized, being either conquered by him or placed in his provinces, or coming thither of their own accord, took up their residence there, built houses, planted vineyards, married wives, begat children, and settled their families' name there. And you also think about it too, as the tendency was even in the time, by the time we get down to Nehemiah and talking about that they had married those that Yahweh told them not to marry, because they were mingled in among them and saw wives that they liked, and they took wives of what they wanted.
I think Dave had a.
Yeah.
Oh.
Just one quick point.
Am I missing a cue here or something?
No. I just, I'd start talking and
Okay.
you couldn't hear me. On this one, I have a reference to the mustard seed, the parable of the mustard seed that Yeshua gives in Matthew 13:31. We had just read that not too long ago. It says, another parable he put forth, saying, the kingdom of heaven is likened to a grain of a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all seed, but when it is grown, is the greatest among herbs, and becomes a tree, so that the birds and the air come and lodge in its branches thereof. So this is the same kind of description of Pharaoh and his dominance over his land.
Right.
The kingdom of heaven is showing the dominance over all the land of the people.
As the commentary goes on, and under his shadow dwelt all great nations, under his protection, care, and government. Many large kingdoms and states were, yea, all were either subject to him or sought to be his friends and allies. Do we have any comparison to that today? What is one of the largest armies on the face of the earth?
The U.S.
Has more under their protection than anywhere else. I mean, you look at all the Army bases, Navy bases, and everything else, and all the allies that they have, at least they think they have, they're out there. It goes on here, the Jewish Targum, by his army he subdued all the strong towers, and under his governors he subjected all the provinces of the earth, and in the shadow of his kingdom dwelt all the numerous people. Right now, do you realize that most of the trading that goes on in this world is done in the U.S. dollar? But that is about to become a past tense, especially with these BRICS nations coming together to where they're going to have a gold standard backing their money, and they will no longer be taking U.S. dollars, that piece of paper that's only worth as much as that piece of paper is. It has a number on it, and as long as somebody's willing to take it, it's fine. But if they don't take it, there's no value to it then. So, I mean, you look at the things that are happening in the world, I look at it as a point of how some of these things are correlating to what he's talking to here about Egypt and all of the nations around Israel, including Israel, and what went on. Ezekiel 31:7. Thus was it beautiful in its greatness, in the length of its branches, for its root was by many waters. Commentary. Thus he was fair in his greatness, meaning he was amiable, lovely, delightful to look upon in the greatness of his majesty and his royal glory and dignity. Well, basically, in the past, that's the way our presidents were looked upon, because they were a source of money if you were a poor country. They were a source of protection if you want to have what they considered to be a democracy. But you look at it today. I don't think our president today is amiable, lovely, delightful to look upon, or have greatness of his majesty. I mean, just look how things have gone down.
2 cents worth.
Oh, and in his royal glory and dignity, of course. In the length of his branches, in the extent of his empire, and the providences of it, goes on the commentary, for his root was by great waters. His kingdom was well established, firmly rooted among the multitude of people, from whom he had a large revenue to support his throne and government. Yeah, we used to have a large revenue. and the dignity of it by tribute, taxes. Well, we're fixing to find out what tribute and taxes and customs and presents we're going to have to come up with. And through the large trade and traffic of his subjects in different parts, from whence he received great profit and advantage. Well, that money's not coming in. Somebody else has got to supply it. So keep that in mind. The Jewish commentary, the Targum, and he became victorious by his auxiliaries, by the multitude of his mighty ones, so that his terror was upon many people. Yeah, they were afraid of him. When it came down to it, they were really afraid of him. And that's what happens, in this world. Ezekiel 31:8 says, the cedars in the garden of Elohim could not hide it. The cypress trees were not like its boughs. The pine trees were not as its branches, nor was any tree in the garden of Elohim like it in its beauty. Commentary. Cedars in the garden of Elohim could not hide him. That is, could not rise so high as this cedar and overtop him and obscure his glory, even those that were his most excellent, which grew in Eden, near to which Babylon stood, and where a mighty king dwelt. The sense is that the greatest kings and potentates in the whole world, which is like a garden planted by Yahweh, were not equal to the king of Assyria, and much less exceeded him in grandeur, wealth, and power. The fir trees were not like his boughs, lesser kings and princes, comparable to fir trees for the beauty, regularity, order, and flourishing condition of their kingdoms. Yet these were but petty states, and not to be compared with the provinces of the king of Assyria. And the chestnut trees were not like his branches, lesser states still, which, though they well set and well spread and full of people, yet not answerable to some countries that were in the provinces that belonged to the Assyrian Empire. Oh, by the way, I have about 9 chestnut trees planted on my property. I think there's about 6 of them that are still alive. It's been a long, dry summer. Not any tree, versus going on with the commentary, in the garden of Elohim was like unto him in his beauty. Meaning no king, no prince, or potentate, whatever in the whole world, was to be compared to him for royal majesty and greatness. The Jewish commentary, the Targum, mighty kings could not prevail against him because of the strength of his power, which they had from Yahweh. Rulers could not stand before his army, and mighty men could not prevail against his auxiliaries because of the strength of the power he had from Yahweh. There is none like him in his strength. As long as Yahweh was holding him up, he was fine. Ezekiel 31:9. I made it beautiful by the multitude of its branches, so that all the trees of Eden that were in the Garden of Eden, Elohim, envied him. This is Yahweh was talking about what he did for him, to make it for him. Goes on here in the commentary, says, I have made him fair by the multitude of his branches, or provinces, the extensiveness of his dominions, all his power and strength, riches and wealth, grandeur and glory, and the vast dominions he is possessed of were all from Yahweh. Now, and here they got the Lord. I'm adding Yahweh.
Thank you.
Huh?
Thank you.
As whatever kings have are, though they are too apt to describe it to themselves, but all are from him by whom the kings reign. In other words, Yahweh says, I'm the one that puts them in power. I'm the one that takes them down. And that's what people need to remember and think about, and what is going on in this world. You can pray to Yahweh and ask him to make things well for us all, so that we can survive, or you can go out there and try to do better than Yahweh's doing, which is what a lot of people think they can do, but they can't.
Dennis.
Yes.
So I always wondered, why does Scripture always use a tree to demonstrate kind of power and greatness? If we think about it, back then, they always, walked a certain path, or they were outside more so than we are today. So they would see a tree start from a small acorn and grow up to be a big, magnificent tree, and And if they looked at a tree, you wasn't bringing that tree down just by chopping it down. They had some trees that, you know, it was difficult for them to be moved. And so today, we don't see trees like we used to. We don't go outside enough to see the development of a tree. So we don't have the same value of a tree that was back then. And I've seen videos where they chop down trees now in a matter of seconds. They have machines that could just take a whole forest down in a day. And so we just don't have that understanding and built up mindset behind a tree to actually, you know, reverence a tree as such as being described in these particular verses.
My dad, what year did Dad start work at the nursery? What year did Dad start work at the nursery? 1951. It was basically about just after World War II. My dad went to work on a U.S. Forest Service pine tree nursery in a little town called Brooklyn, Mississippi. It was the W.W. Ash nursery. And what they did there was they were planting pine seed. And if you've ever seen, I'm not talking about those big pine nuts you see in all these stores and everything. This regular pine seed is about the size of a BB. But there were different ones. It was slash, loblolly, longleaf, and they had different characteristics. But he went to work out there just as basically a field hand, plowing, planting, whatever was doing, shoveling and digging. But what got me was within 1 year from that seed, you would have a seedling that was about foot and a half tall in 1 year's growth. Now with a longleaf, all you saw was the needles. There was no, other than a bud right at ground level, there was nothing. It wasn't until the second year that it started actually becoming, in the longleaf, actually becomes a bigger tree than the regular slash or loblolly. I've collected pine cones to sell to the nursery at $1 a bushel. And that's how my brother and I make money in the fall. But I mean, and I grew up with this whole process of watching them buy the pine cones, put them in a building that on shelves. There was a dry kiln that dried it out and made the pine cones open, and then they dumped them out. And he went down to a conveyor belt and went through a machine that tumbled them and tumbled out all of the seeds, and then the pine cones went out to what they call a hammer mill, and they were shredded for mulch that were then used when they went to plant the seed, because the seed is planted on top of the ground. They would make up the bed. It had to be of a certain weight, and then they had taken, after they bought seed and had gotten the seed, they would take a sample, and then they would see the germination. And in the germination, how many of the seed actually germinate, and the ones that do germinate, how many of them are diseased or what kind of disease, whatever, and how many they were going to have to plant in order to be able to ship out the following year anywhere from 30 to 50 million trees. That's how many they were producing. And so if you go through the South, from East Texas all the way up into, I think, North Carolina, about as far north as they went, the pine forests that were through there came from seedlings that they grew. Let's see. My father worked doing that. Like I said, I saw every step of the way. Mama, they tried to do a special nursery, pine tree farm. Orchard, whatever you want to call it. I don't think of orchard as being pines, but these were, what they had done is they went out in the forest and they clipped buds off of mature trees that were a certain shape, and if they met all the criteria, then they put a band around it and they became federal protected. And they grafted those into 1-year-old or 2-year-old stock. And when that graft took, they cut off all the side dried limbs, so only that graft was being produced. And so once they planted them out in this orchard, by that fall, here's this pine tree that's only about 2 foot high, bent over the ground with a pine cone on it about that big from a longleaf or whatever. And but they did that. They did 400 acres of doing this and trying to produce a super pine tree. Is the whole idea. When we used to go to the feast at Big Sandy, Texas, at Ambassador College, there on the campus, the campground was in a pine tree nursery, or farm, I should say. Neat rows, you know. So once you plant them like that, they grow straight up because they're all going for the sun. And so they're all nice and straight, and they make nice, after so many years, they make nice fence posts. And after so many years after that, they make nice telephone poles. And so you get to see all of this intricacy that went on with doing that. And see, now I think I've gotten off on the subject, but anyway. But anyway, it was interesting to grow up and around all of that. Mom was one of the best grafters that they had, and that's not meaning grafters like getting graft, but grafting the pine trees and having a survival rate. She had the highest survival rate. She and Dad would sit out there on Sunday afternoon and graft trees. Because we lived on the last 4 years I was at home, we lived on the nursery itself. Because my dad had then first he became the assistant nurseryman, and then he became the nurseryman in charge.
But he loved that job.
He was, actually I found on the internet a paper he wrote. And he was a speaker at every year at the what was that, pine tree up there in
Well, it could be in Arkansas, it could be
yeah.
where they wanted to put it.
And so, but the thing about it is, that's why Yahweh uses things like this, because you look at the many uses that pine tree had, or any of these trees that you're talking about, the many uses they had. Plus, it's like in my backyard, I have an oak tree that I think was planted when they built the house as part of the landscape, because that thing is 3 or more feet in diameter and way high. It takes up the whole majority of my backyard. It also takes up all the water out of the ground too, so the grass don't do too good. But you look at what it could do. You have the fruit trees it talks about, the fruit that it actually produces, that the birds can eat, the animals can eat, you can eat. The nuts, like the acorns, the pecans, hazelnuts. Hopefully my hazelnuts will survive, and someday I might actually get a hazelnut out of it. And so but the stability. Now, here 3 days ago we had a windstorm come through Paris, Texas, and there was a lot of tree limbs that came down as a result. That's when when they came down, you'd see why, because the rot in the center of the tree. It was all right as long as there wasn't anything causing it to shift too much. It looked fine, but the rot brought it down. And so when he's talking about this, it gives the people, because as pointed out, if you were on the land, you were working the land, you were looking at it. I mean, back home, there was a lot of trees that you used as a marker. Turn left at this one, at this particular tree, this type of tree, type things. Or, that's that house down there that's got that big pecan tree in the backyard, or in the front yard, or the side yard. It was things that were permanent, more or less, and could be be able to find where you were going, especially for people that didn't read. Let's see. See if I got that answered. Going on here in the commentary, so that all the trees of Eden that were in the garden of Elohim. Oh, that's right. I already got that. Verse 10 of Ezekiel 31, because I'm going to get moving. Therefore, thus says Adonai Yahweh, because you are exalted in stature, and he has set his top among the thick boughs, and his heart is lifted up in his height. Okay, the commentary there thus says Adonai Yahweh, having described the greatness of the Assyrian monarch, now follows the account of his fall, and the cause of it, pride. Because thou hast lifted up yourself in height, this is either an address to the Pharaoh king of Egypt, who, though he did not rise up so high as the Assyrian monarch in glory and grandeur, yet he lifted up himself and thought himself superior to any, which reason he must be brought down. Or the words were directed to the Assyrian monarch by a change of person frequent in Scripture, who, though he was raised by Yahweh to the height of honor and dignity he was, yet ascribed it to himself. In other words, I did that. He didn't give Yahweh credit. And he hath shot up his top among the thick boughs, the multitude of provinces over which he became head and governor. And his heart is lifted up in his height with pride, insolence, and contempt of Elohim and men, of which see the instance in Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5 through 8. Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5 through 8 says, Woe to Asher, the Syrian, a rod of mine anger, and a staff in the hand of my indignation. Against a profane nation I sent him, and concerning a people of my wrath I charged him, to spoil, and to seize prey, and to make it a treading place as the clay of outpaces. And he thinks not, and he thinketh not so, and his heart reckons not so, for to destroy is in his heart, and to cut off nations not a few. For he has said, Are not my princes altogether kings? Ezekiel 31:11. I will even deliver him into the hand of the mighty one of the nations. He will surely deal with him. I have driven him out for his wickedness. Commentary, I have therefore delivered him in the hand of the mighty one of the heathen, or into the hand of the mightiest of the nations, the mightiest prince among them. Some understand this as Arbaces the Mede, by whom Sardanapalus had been defeated long before this time. Others of Merodach-Baladan, king of Babylon, by whom Esarhaddon, the Assyrian monarch, was vanquished, or rather Nebuchadnezzar, who was called Nabopolassar, who in the first year of his reign, in conjunction with Cyaxares, king of Media, took Nineveh, the metropolis of the Assyrian monarchy, and this was by the appointment of Elohim, and under the direction of his provinces, and through success he gave to the arms of his princes, according to his own decrees and prophecies. Some render it into the hand of the of the nations, yet meaning either Cyaxares or Nebuchadnezzar, so called because of their great power and might which they had from Yahweh. He shall surely deal with him, or in doing he shall do to him, or he shall do with him as he pleases. He shall easily manage him, though so powerful, and deal with him according to his deserts. Or as in the Jewish commentary of the Targum, he shall take vengeance on him as he did. I have driven him out of his wickedness, out of his courts and palace, out of his royal city of Nineveh, out of his kingdom and dominions, and he shall reside and reign no more there. And all this for the wickedness, pride, and oppression, and other sins. When Elohim strips men of their honor, riches, power, and dominion, it is because of their abuse of them. For some sin or sins, or wickedness they have been guilty of, both against him and men, and therefore it is but just and righteous in him to dethrone such princes and drive them from their seats.
Can I ask you something?
Uh-huh.
When you were saying Assyria is Asher,
Uh-huh.
and Asher being the son of one of the sons of Shem, that one?
I didn't look that up.
Oh,
Um,
because I was relating it to what you started talking about being cousins.
yeah.
That's what I thought.
Well,
you were gonna-
they would have to be cousins because
Yeah.
there was only the descendants of Noah that came
Right.
out of the flood,
Right. 'Cause I
and
was
everybody else descended from them.
just wondering.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's the connection you need to make to see why Yahweh is so I should say down on them, because at some point their ancestors knew the truth.
Yeah, but
They knew Yahweh, and even here they still know who Yahweh is. They just don't give him the same, I guess you could say, respect that they did their idols.
right.
And they figured, well, the other thing was, by bringing Israel down to their level, they would get Yahweh to take punishment against Israel, which he did. And so Israel would lose their power and strength too, and they would rise up above.
So Dennis, also just want to mention
Uh-huh.
Asher, spelled Assur, was also a place, a city in Mesopotamia,
Yeah.
and it was actually named after one of the gods of the Assyrians.
Okay.
So it could be a person, it could be a city, or it could be a deity.
Or an idol. Yes, Curtis.
Actually, we might find this back in Genesis 25. Let me read the first couple verses. This is about Abraham and Keturah. And Abraham again took a wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shush. And Jokshan begot Seba, Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were Asherim,
Let's see.
Lechurim, and Leumi. Boy, that's hard to say.
Well,
So
see, that's.
he seems to be a grandson of Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be the third son of Shem.
Yeah, second son of Shem, father of the Assyrians.
So, I mean, there's, I put it this way. They were all related.
True enough.
One way or the next, they were all related, yes.
And think about it today. No matter what the race is, we're all related.
The human.
All of our ancestors trace back to Noah and his sons and their children. All of it. Doesn't matter what. No matter what people want to say, there were no others. There were no other humanoids. I'll put it that way. I love all the discussion right now about the no, all the discussion right now about all of the UFOs.
Discussion.
Well, it's like one of the I guess you could say ministers of minister. I keep stepping on something. This guy has a program and he discusses all this. He said, "Well, wait a minute. When you're talking about this UFOs, are you talking about physical beings, or are you talking about spiritual beings? Because we know that they're spiritual beings. Scripture talks about spiritual beings that can manifest themselves. You know, Yahweh could be seen. The angels that were with him could be seen. Yet, in the modern day, they're UFOs because you don't know who they are or what they are. What they are. When you talk about UFO, now they got a new term. It's no longer UFO. It's unidentified.
Unmanned aerial vehicle.
Yeah, unmanned aerial vehicles. And basically, are they? You know, the so you get all this. Why do you get all upset? We know that they're demons. We know that they're the source of this UFO phenomena. So, what's your problem? Why don't you just go about your business and do what you're supposed to be doing in the first place? And you don't have to worry about it. So, anyway, let me get back to where I'm at. Let's see.
Verse 12, I think.
Yeah, verse 12. Yeah, this thing tends to slide a little bit. Verse 12 of Ezekiel 31. Strangers, the tyrants of nations, have cut him off and have left him. His branches have fallen on the mountains and in all the valleys, and his boughs are broken by all the watercourses of the land. All the peoples of the earth have gone down from his shadow and have left him. Look how we're losing our power as what we thought was our power. How things are changing for this country, for the world, in fact, at this time. Commentary, and strangers, the terrible of the nations, have cut him off. Cut off the boughs and branches of his cedar, and cut him down to the ground, that is, utterly destroyed him, his empire and monarchy. These strangers were the Medes, who lived in a country distant from Assyria, and the terrible of the nations, the cruel and merciless Chaldeans, the soldiers of the king of Babylon's army, and have left him upon the mountains, like a tree cut down there, and its boughs and branches lopped off, which roll down from thence into the valleys, and by the rivers of water signify his depression from a high and exalted state to a very low one, as follows. And in the valleys his branches are fallen, and his boughs are broken by all the rivers of the land, signifying that many provinces and countries under his dominion were broken off, and by force taken away from him. And they broke off and revolted of themselves, and either set up for themselves and recovered their former power and authority, or gave up themselves to the conqueror, as the Jewish commentary, the Targum. And in all the valleys his army fell, and his auxiliaries were scattered by all the rivers of the land. You know, you just look how the rotation is. Kingdoms rise, kingdoms fall. It's an ongoing. While this one grows strong, this one grows weak. While this one becomes a great nation, this one falls apart and becomes what we call third world or third rate. And all the people of the earth are gone down from his shadow, and have left him those that joined themselves to his empire and put themselves under his protection, or sought his friendship and alliance, now withdrew themselves from him and left him alone to shift for himself, as frightened birds and beasts will do when a tree is cut down and fallen. Well, they're not going to stay, they're going to flee. You know, the ones that had to hollow out, the animals in it leave, the birds that had nests, they leave because it's no longer standing upright and doing its job for them. And the boughs are under the shadow of which they dwelt. The Targum paraphrases as from the shadow of his kingdom. Let me see here. I'll do one more verse, and then I think that'll be. Let's see, make sure. Verse 14. To the end that none of all the trees by the waters exalt themselves in their stature, and don't set at their top among the thick boughs. Their mighty ones don't stand up on their height, even all who drink water. For they are all delivered to death, to the lower parts of the earth, among the children of men, with those who go down to the pit. Commentary, to the end that none of all the trees by the waters exalt themselves for their height. The end proposed by Yahweh in the destruction of the king of Assyria and the use he made of it is this, that the kings of the earth take warning hereby, who rule over a multitude of people, comparable to waters, and who abound in riches and wealth, that they are not elated with pride and vanity because of their exalted estate, their grandeur and dignity, and do not behave insolently against Elohim on whom they depend, nor haughtily and in a oppressive manner towards their own subjects over whom they rule. Neither shoot up their top among the thick boughs, affect universal monarchy, as he did, and set up themselves over all the kingdom and states as he had over them, and make all subject to them. Neither their trees stand up in their height that drink water, that is, kings and potentates who rule over the people, and are supplied and supported by them in their exalted stations, by the tribute and taxes they pay them, and so abound in riches and power, should not trust in the height of honor and power they are raised to, and treat contemptuously Elohim and man. But consider what they are, that they are but men, and are in slippery places where there is no standing long, and especially when death comes as follows. For they are delivered unto death in the nether parts of the earth. They are mortal by nature. I mean, you only got a certain lifespan as other men. They are appointed to die. It's appointed once for all of us to die, and will be delivered into the hands of death when the time is come, who will not spare them because of their crowns and their sepulchres. That will not get them special benefits. And when they will be laid in the grave, in the lowest parts of the earth, who used to sit upon elevated thrones of state, in the midst of the children of men, with those that go down to the pit, the grave, where they are upon a level with the poorest and meanest of their subjects. Meaning we all, sooner or later, will wind up in the grave. We can't take none of the riches with us. We can't take any of our royal apparel. Well, we can put it in a casket with it. It's going to rot with us. But what I'm saying is, none of the grandeur, your scepter, all that, that's not going to do you any good. Because once you go to sleep, as the Bible puts it, once you go to sleep, the only thing you can hope for is a resurrection. Then, the only thing you can hope for, I guess you could say, is the first resurrection.
Right.
Because that is the primary one. If you make it to the second, you're really in a second-class status and more likely going to wind up in that lake of fire as a result. So you really want to be in that first one. So you really want to take the time and get right with Yahweh. It says, it goes on here, the Targum, that all the kings of the east might not be lifted up with their strength, nor exercise tyranny over the kingdoms, nor all that hold a kingdom lift up themselves in their own strength, for all are delivered unto death. Meaning all are going to be judged. And that's the thing about it. All of mankind will be judged on what they have done, not what anybody else has done. Because it even talks about that at the end times, only Noah and no, I knew that'd fly out of my hand.
Daniel? Are you talking about?
I'm sorry, what'd you say, David? Only
I thought
Noah.
there was three.
There's three listed.
Joe? Was it Joe?
They would only be able to save themselves. They would not be able to save anybody else. So that basically tells you right there that you're on your own. Yes, Daniel.
I can upload myself to the internet and take my Bitcoin with me.
Yeah, sure. I love Bitcoin. It don't exist. It's just a number on a piece of paper. And all you have to do is shut down the internet and nobody has any Bitcoin. It's all gone. I found out the other day, I never understood a whole lot about this Bitcoin thing, but anyway. I hear them talking about mining and having to have these big, huge supercomputers that just do everything to mine. I'm saying, mine what? There's no they ain't digging up anything and processing it. No, yes, they are. What they're doing they're mining those bits and pieces of Bitcoin that somebody forgot how to get back to it, how to access it. And we're talking about 24 digit or 32 digit numbers that they use. Huh? 32. You have to remember a strip of either 32 letters or 32 numbers. And get them in the proper order and get them whether they're uppercase or lowercase type thing. That's a lot of work. And then it's only good if somebody will take it. You know, it's like when it talks about in Scripture about they'll be throwing their silver and gold into the streets. Well, you can't eat silver and gold when you're starving, so it's not going to matter. If you're going to die, what good is that silver or that gold? It's like my son, he won't hear this, so I can tell it. He worked for McDonald's from the time he got out of high school. Well, actually before he got out of high school. He wound up a manager of one of their stores even. But he was collecting McDonald's memorabilia. He had it all stored up in the attic. I mean, in the original cases and everything. And I told him, that's fine. It's only worth as much as you think it's worth. Because until you find somebody that's stupid enough to pay what they say that it's worth, it's worthless. It's just sitting there. You can watch the Antique Roadshow. Yeah, they stumble across it. But it's only worth what somebody is willing to come in there and pay them, actually hand them the cash for it. So, you know, I look at things sometimes kind of cockeyed, but so, you know, you'll have to understand that I am cockeyed. And so, with that, I will close out today's study, and we will pick it up there next time around. Oh, I am speaking on for everybody that's out there that's listening to this, I'll be speaking on trumpets, which is the 15th at 2 p.m. Because on a high day, we always have services at 2 p.m., just one service. So, I wish you all a happy Sabbath. Praise Yahweh, hallelujah, praise Yeshua, his salvation.